Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Coming up, what did Donald Trump privately tell European leaders? Reports suggest the US president revealed Vladimir Putin is not interested in peace. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Poland prepares for hybrid war on the Baltic Sea. Germany's new Chancellor maintains that NATO is ready to defend itself. And outrage over Hungary's proposed moves against foreign-funded organisations. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk won't say whether US President Donald Trump told European leaders that Russia's Vladimir Putin does not want peace. It comes as Trump goes back and forth over his position on the war in Ukraine, again threatening a total walkout from negotiations earlier this week. Kadier reports.
As the war in Ukraine is still far from over,
get this war ended.
US President Donald Trump has allegedly told European leaders his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin does not want to end the war, as he believes he is winning. TVP World has confronted Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk with these media reports.
I do not confirm such a statement, but I can confirm that the situation is difficult and there isn't a trace of goodwill from the Russian side, especially when it comes to the immediate ceasefire, but also when it comes to any honest peace negotiations.
Donald Trump's comments on the war have ranged from overly optimistic to downright false or misleading.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after we win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled.
TVP World has been systematically compiling these comments at tvpworld.com. Some of Trump's comments are also in direct contradiction to the latest media reports on Putin's words.
No, I think Putin wants to stop the war. That was my question to him. I think he wants to end it, and they want to end it fast, both of them. And Zelensky wants to end it too.
While Vladimir Putin keeps claiming he is open to peace talks, it is the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky who agreed to Trump's immediate ceasefire proposal back in March.
I think it's always legitimate for a new government to try something new, but now we know who wants peace, who agrees to the ceasefire, and who doesn't agree to the ceasefire. And I think it's time to go back to basics, which is to start applying pressure to the aggressor and not the victim of aggression.
Trump seems to recognize that Putin doesn't want a ceasefire, even as Trump has given way and is not putting a priority on that ceasefire. You know, the priority for Trump is that Russia and Ukraine again have direct talks sometime, somewhere.
And while President Zelensky was waiting for Putin in Turkey last week, the Russian leader was a no-show. With questions rising over the future of the peace process, Polish officials believe Russia can't be dragging this war forever as long as the US keeps its end of the bargain.
What wouldn't be understandable would be to lift the to stop the supplies or the supply of targeting and intelligence information. As long as the US does that, and as long as Ukraine holds, we need a bit more time for the sanctions to do their work on Russia's war economy.
As the EU has just adopted its 17th sanctions package, the US could be following suit. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says the Senate is ready to vote on additional sanctions on Russia if a peace agreement isn't reached soon. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
And joining me now for more on this story is our correspondent Alex Kadier in Brussels. Good evening, Alex. What are you hearing on the ground about Trump's call with these leaders?
Well, good evening, Aaron. Of course, Prime Minister Donald Tusk was on that call, but so too was Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. That was confirmed to me by European officials in Brussels just in the last few hours. But I wanted to know more. I wanted to push them to see if, in fact, what was reported, Donald Trump said about Vladimir Putin not wanting peace, was accurate, whether or not von der Leyen, the Commission President, got that message as well from the US President. This is what her chief spokesperson had to say. Let's have a listen.
President Trump had a debrief call with several European leaders, including President von der Leyen, and shared the outcome of that call. Not aware of all the details. What is important also to note is that they agreed on next steps, notably on the fact that there would be direct talks between Ukraine and Russia with the participation of the European counterparts.
So, Aaron, that is Brussels speak for we cannot confirm if that was in fact said by Donald Trump on that call. There is clearly some delicate diplomacy going on both in Brussels and, as we've heard in that last report, in Warsaw as well, being very careful not to push Donald Trump too hard, although he has acknowledged that there is, or reportedly acknowledged that Vladimir Putin does not want peace because he thinks he's winning the war. That now says the question, what are you going to do about it? And for now, there have been no announcements of more US sanctions and more US pressure on Russia. That, therefore, puts the onus on the European Union. We've heard Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, talking about more harsher sanctions in the next package of sanctions coming out of the European Union. So I wanted to find out from those same European officials exactly what would be in those sanctions, when they would come out, and this is what the Foreign Affairs spokesperson had to say about that.
We cannot disclose the exact content and the negotiations on this. What we have is also what both the President but also the High Representative have already mentioned when it comes to Nord Stream, but also further listings of vessels.
So for now, the Commission cannot disclose when they will be releasing these new sanctions, or at least these new proposed sanctions. I asked them, would that happen before the leaders of the EU meet at the end of June? No response from the Commission. So clearly, despite that pressure, despite that urgency, and that risk, of course, that the United States may just wash its hands and move away from all of this. That was the fear, and you heard that expressed by Minister Sikorski saying that he did not want to see the United States giving up on Ukraine and moving away from sharing intelligence. There is also a big concern that the European Union will not be moving particularly quickly. Now, that spokesperson you just heard, Aneta Hipper, was pushed again whether or not she could give us a timeline about when these sanctions would be released. The answer was as quickly as possible, without any more details being given. Now, we know it may target things like the Nord Stream pipelines, even more of Russia's shadow fleet. We know that Ukraine is calling for secondary sanctions targeting countries that are trading with Russia, but at the moment, no clear timeline other than as quickly as possible. But certainly for Ukraine, as quickly as possible doesn't feel quickly enough. Aaron?
Alex Kadier from Brussels, thank you. Poland is ramping up its deterrence efforts to protect the Baltic Sea from Moscow's hybrid threats. A Russian vessel, reportedly part of the country's so-called shadow fleet, was caught acting suspiciously near undersea power cables on Wednesday, prompting Polish authorities to intervene. Our reporter Ovidiusz Nieczeja has more.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says that the Baltic Sea has the potential to become a site of constant conflict, provocations and incidents. Donald Tusk has attended a briefing at the Polish Naval Operations Center with the Navy Command following an incident at the Baltic Sea involving Poland's undersea infrastructure. It's a power cable connecting Poland to Sweden, and a Russian shadow fleet vessel was spotted acting suspiciously above that cable. The Polish army intervened and was able to successfully deter that ship, which returned back to a Russian port, according to the Polish authorities. In the aftermath of that incident, the Polish Prime Minister has said that a decision has been made to procure drones for the Polish Navy to better monitor Poland's critical infrastructure.
We have made the decision to immediately initiate the procurement of drones for the Polish Navy. These are very complex platforms that will allow us to effectively monitor what is happening underwater, on the water and above the water at much lower cost than when we have to deploy specialized ships. After listening to the recommendations of high-ranking naval officers, we are giving the green light to proceed.
The Prime Minister says that more incidents are to be expected in the Baltic Sea. That's why Poland is stepping up its security amid the activity of so-called Russian shadow fleet, which is used allegedly by Russia to export oil at prices above the price cap set by Western nations. From Gdańsk for TVP World, Ovidiusz Nicieja.
Debate is underway in the Hungarian parliament over a bill aimed at cracking down on foreign-funded media and human rights groups. The legislation was introduced last week by the nationalist Fidesz party, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Editors of leading European media outlets are now petitioning to stop its progress, with the EU also expected to step in. Aisha Abache and Natalia Oriol explain.
Dubbed the Putinist bill by the opposition, the Hungarian parliament is discussing new legislation that would effectively cripple any legal entity, be it a media outlet, an NGO or a private person criticizing the government, if
they conduct an activity financed from abroad. Their activity is aimed at influencing the Hungarian public life, and with their activity they endanger the sovereignty of Hungary.
What is even more troubling is the vague formulation of this new bill.
Those who vote for this law know precisely that with it they have leave the European Union.
The bill, entitled On the Transparency of Public Life, bears a significant similarity to Russia's foreign agent bill, especially when it comes to accepting financing from abroad.
If they want, they can stop and they can silence all critical voices. So the law is much tougher than the Russian law was voted like 10 years, 50 years ago.
If passed in its current wording, the legislation could even sanction the main opposition party, TISA.
Anyone who deals with politics in Hungary should not accept money from abroad. He is becoming more and more similar to his trainer, friend or boss, Vladimir Putin.
Anything that can influence opposition action, criticizing government, trying to attract votes in the coming parliamentary elections, which are due in spring next year, then the government would like to eliminate, restrict.
The new bill has already sparked the largest anti-government demonstrations of the last 2 months, which began after the governing Fidesz party banned LGBT support marches and allowed Chinese AI facial recognition tools to be used against possible offenders. Editors representing over 80 leading European media outlets have called to abandon the legislation in a petition published on Tuesday. According to the signatories, the bill contradicts both the EU treaties and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. The EU is expected to take a stance. Katalin Czech, a Hungarian MP, recently told TVP World.
But as the European Commission has the duty to protect EU citizens, including Hungarian citizens, including Hungarian journalists, civil rights associations, they just have the moral duty to step up and target this law in front of the European courts, asking for interim measures in an ongoing court procedure. They have to do everything they can.
The vote is scheduled for mid-June, amid an outcry from international organizations like Human Rights Watch, which have warned the move could destroy democracy in Hungary. This report for TVP World by Natalia Oriol and Aisha Abache.
The entire alliance will jointly defend every inch of NATO territory. That was the message from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz as he unveiled a new armoured brigade in Lithuania on Europe's eastern flank. The announcement marks Berlin's first permanent foreign troop deployment since World War II. John Todd and Natalia Oriol have more.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has reasserted NATO's unbreakable unity.
Anyone who challenges NATO must know that we are prepared. Anyone who threatens any ally must know that the entire alliance will join in and defend every inch of NATO territory. We must be ready to do everything to defend ourselves so that we never have to.
Lithuania's president Gitanas Nausėda welcomes Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Defense Minister Boris Pistorius to Vilnius. They made the trip to formally mark the establishment of a German brigade in the country.
First of all, we are helping to strengthen all of NATO's entire eastern flank, and we are of course prepared to provide further military assistance to the Ukrainian army. A shortage of financial resources will not be the cause of failure for this.
By the end of this year, 500 German soldiers are expected to be on the ground. The move comes as America refocuses its priorities on the Asia-Pacific and away from Europe.
We share with the Chancellor our strong support for the transatlantic link, and we realize that the withdrawal of American troops would create additional threats for the security of the eastern flank.
Establishment of the so-called Lithuania Brigade represents Germany's first permanent foreign troop deployment since the Second World War. The goal is to deploy some 5,000 German troops in the country, helping strengthen the EU and NATO's eastern border.
Let our unity remain our greatest power.
This report for TVP World by John Todd and Natalia Orion.
Romania's top court has certified the presidential mandate of Liberal Bucharest Mayor Nicu Jordan, who won the country's recent election runoff. In an address on Thursday, Dan pledged to keep Romania in the European mainstream and uphold civil liberties. The certification comes after authorities rejected an application by defeated far-right candidate George Simeon to annul the vote on the grounds of alleged foreign interference. Dan is expected to be sworn in as president next week. And with Nicu Jordan's government soon getting down to business, the economy could prove to be his first real litmus test. Jan Kennedy explains.
The surprising win of Liberal candidate Nicu Jordan in Romania's presidential election sparks a wave of economic optimism.
As we saw after the first tour of presidential elections, the economy took a dip because of Simeon's results. I don't want to know what would have happened if he got elected as president.
Bucharest's main BET index rose by 7% compared to last Thursday, and the Romanian leu was strengthening, remaining above 5 to the euro, but having fallen from a historic low after the collapse of the government. At first glance, Romania, the second biggest economy in the EU's east, has nothing to worry about.
Romania is developing pretty well. It has got relatively high rate of growth in last years and managed to achieve quite a sizable increase in the GDP per capita, but the policy, as I said, is far from being sound.
As the dust begins to settle, Romania's underlying challenges are coming into focus. Last year, the country's deficit surpassed 9% of GDP, the highest in the European Union. This has fueled the rise of Romania's public debt to GDP ratio, which since 2019 has risen by 20 percentage points to nearly 55% in January and is currently on track to surpass the 60% mark in 2026. This spells trouble for the country's credit rating. While it remains at investment grade for now, it could soon lose this status.
It's difficult to have at the same time a growing debt, a growing deficit, and we are looked by foreign agencies to see if they downgrade or they don't downgrade Romania. Right now, we are on the last notch of investment grade, close to being non-investment at some point.
Fiscal pressure is evident when we look at Romanian bond yields, which after this year's surge to over 7% are the highest in the EU. As Dan prepares to take office, parliamentary parties begin negotiations to form a coalition. The Liberals hope it will consist of all pro-European forces to ensure strong support in Parliament ahead of the anticipated cuts to public spending.
We have to take some very important decisions that may be unpopular. At the same time, and under these conditions, I believe that a minority government would not be able to effectively manage the country's affairs.
But experts believe the fiscal crisis is not inevitable. If the government formation proceeds smoothly and moderate spending cuts or efficiency measures are taken, Romania's credit rating should remain at investment grade. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
We return now to our top story. Reports emerging on Thursday that US President Donald Trump has privately revealed to European leaders that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is not ready for peace. So what's next? Here to break it all down is Roland Freudenstein, co-founder at the Brussels Freedom Hub. Good evening, Roland.
Good evening from Brussels.
So, is Donald Trump saying behind closed doors what the world has already been thinking, that Putin is not interested in a peace deal?
There's a beautiful expression in English, Aaron. It's clear as mud. And I think that describes the situation. We do not know exactly what Donald Trump thinks. We do not know exactly how determined European leaders are to pull ahead with sanctions without the United States, possibly. And we do not know what exactly those sanctions are going to be. There are indications on Trump's mood. There are indications on the resolve of the Europeans, and there are some indications of the nature of the sanctions, but we do not know.
What does this mean for the future of these talks? Today, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, he was telling us that, quote, the situation is difficult as there isn't a trace of goodwill from the Russian side. I mean, are genuine roundtable peace negotiations effectively dead in the water?
Well, the one thing we do know, actually, contrary to the previous points, is that indeed Putin doesn't want peace and he doesn't even want a ceasefire. But he wants to create the impression that he's ready to negotiate. I mean, he himself proposed direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. We've had a first taste
in Istanbul and didn't turn up.
Exactly. But I mean, when Putin says negotiations, he means some underlings, some lower level bureaucrats. When Zelensky actually fulfilled Trump's wish to be ready for negotiations, of course, Zelensky means a direct encounter between the two presidents, Putin and Zelensky. Well, Putin doesn't want that because that would be, in his view, some kind of recognition of Ukraine as a legitimate country, which he's been doubting all the time. I mean, actually, Putin doesn't want Ukraine to be a successful and sovereign country. So I think we are going to see a continuation of the Ukraine-Russia talks, possibly in mid-June in the Vatican. But that's all we know.
I want to ask about President Trump's role in all of this, because he was the guy who once promised to wrap up this conflict within 24 hours. I mean, has this process been a massive failure for him, whatever happens now, and I guess his transactional deal-making that he was always touting before the campaign, on the campaign, after assuming the presidency?
Aaron, the answer to this question is really easy. Of course, it's a disaster for Trump, but he doesn't see it that way. And certainly, he's got enough people in the MAGA movement in the United States to actually see things his way, which is that, he's tried everything, but, those Russians and Ukrainians, they obviously don't want to agree and they want to continue the war. That's the way he's putting it right now. So, the U.S. has tried everything. It has achieved a tremendous lot already. That's what he says. By bringing the two to a table, but peace is not 1 centimeter closer. So, I mean, that's what I would call a disaster compared to the rather boisterous announcement of Donald Trump in the election campaign.
Is it possible that now, as America appears to step away from these peace talks, potentially step out as mediator altogether, Donald Trump just realizes he can't solve this easily, he's getting bored, and he's trying to focus elsewhere?
Well, that's what it looks like. But the real question, the existential question for Ukraine and also for Europe is, to what extent will the US continue to support Ukraine especially militarily, especially with military hardware, and especially with intelligence, satellite intelligence. I mean, we saw what effects there are of the US withholding such intelligence for slightly over a week. That cost Ukraine its bridgehead in the Kursk area earlier this year. So, you know, a withholding of US support would be indeed a disaster. The Europeans would try to make up for this, but we can all agree that this will not last very long, probably not beyond the end of this year. But, you know, the US continuing to mediate or withdrawing is not really the decisive question at the moment.
And you've raised a really good point there. I mean, where we stand today, does Kyiv have real reason to be worried that Trump, America, is on the brink of pulling out as a mediator, or even, as you mentioned there, its military support for Ukraine? You know, in Kyiv, do they have reason to be concerned about the very real possibility of this?
Well, our Ukrainian partners and allies have had good reason to worry for about 3 years now. And, you know, there is nothing new in Ukrainians looking at the prospect, the possibility of actually being left alone, not by the entire West, of course, but left alone by important allies such as the United States. And so there's nothing dramatically new in this, but what has actually slightly improved is the European resolve in supporting Ukraine no matter what happens in Washington. And that is also due to Friedrich Merz being Chancellor of Germany now. Germany is back in the game of European support for Ukraine and the convergence between the European Union and Great Britain, which is a major step forward that actually was formalized Monday this week with the EU-UK agreement on security cooperation and other cooperation. So, you know, there's good news and bad news, but as I said, Ukraine's been worrying for quite some time.
Let's talk about Friedrich Merz. You mentioned him there, the fact that Germany's back on the European stage. He was in Lithuania today, and I'll quote him again here. "Anyone who threatens any ally must know that the entire alliance will join in and defend every inch of NATO territory." He was, of course, announcing the first foreign deployment since World War II for the Germans. Does the power of that statement, Roland, and the power of the NATO alliance still ring true in this day and age as we see America straying away from Europe? This idea that the entire alliance will join in and defend every inch of NATO territory.
Yes, I think that was at least the goal of Friedrich Merz's statements. And he was dead serious when he said this. The European members of NATO and Canada are determined. The United States has, in the form of its president, given different signals over the last couple of months, but at least Trump has not formally withdrawn the United States from NATO. He has not formally cancelled Article 5. He has shed some doubts on the validity of the American security guarantee, including, by the way, a nuclear umbrella, so-called extended nuclear deterrence. But there are some doubts, and I think Putin is rejoicing about this. These cracks appearing in NATO and these doubts about the certainty of the US security guarantee for the Europeans. But that does not deter European leaders, such as Friedrich Merz, from reaffirming their commitment to NATO.
Roland Freudenstein, co-founder at the Brussels Freedom Hub. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Aaron.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.